In this segment, we'll look at claiming priority. Now, in the textbook for section 3-30, it talks about whether you're claiming the benefit of a provisional application or a non-provisional application or a foreign application. For purposes of the clinic, generally speaking, we usually would either be filing or claiming a priority to a provisional application. So the clinic may file a provisional application on behalf of the applicant, and 1 year later we file a non-provisional that claims priority to the provisional. Or secondly, we may have a non-provisional on file, and when it comes up for issuance, sometimes we will go ahead and on behalf of the applicant file a continuation application that also in like manner claims priority to the previously filed non-provisional application. So that's usually the context for that is one of the two, usually to a provisional or to an existing non-provisional. Now I would note the key takeaway, the key takeaway is that you want to make sure you get the priority right up front. Because if you don't, it is a mess. And I really mean that if you go ahead and file and the priority is not spot on, it is a mess in order to rectify it. And the NPEP has all these different situations of when it is that you must disclose the benefit of a priority by, if it's out of that window, what is the petition procedure to actually do it in, what happens if you have a PCT application that goes national phase within the United States, and that U.S. application only claims priority to the PCT application but doesn't claim priority to a national application that, let's say, was based in Australia. So there's all these very complex situations relating to priority. I will distill it down into two main things. The first is make sure that your priority paragraph is 100% correct in your specification. Let me repeat that. When you start out in your specification, you have a priority paragraph, or what they often call related application section. And in that section is where you would specify the claim to priority. So this application is a continuation of and claims priority to U.S. patent application number, blah, 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 filed, such and such date, entitled, and then you give the title, which is hereby incorporated by reference. So in your priority section in the application, one, you need to include the keyword of what the present application is. Is it a continuation? Is it a continuation in part? Two, you need to be very explicit to what it is to which priority is being claimed. So if it's a prior provisional application, you need to indicate it. If it's a prior non-provisional application, you need to indicate it. If it's a PCT application or literally an application filed in Australia, you need to indicate it. And last but not least, after indicating the chain of priority is what it's called, then you give a comma and say all of which, or the contents of which, are hereby incorporated by reference, which means that any of the previously filed applications in the priority chain, any of that text can be relied upon in equal measure for purposes of the present disclosure. Now, usually incorporation by reference really comes into play if you're dealing with continuation in parts, where the text of one application may not be identical to another, or let's say that you have a non-provisional application that claims priority to 10 provisional applications. And each of those 10 provisional applications have 1,000 pages of material. And the present non-provisional, let's say, has only 100. Well, if you incorporate by reference everything that is in the priority chain, that allows you to get access to all of the thousands of pages in that provisional as if it had been filed in the present application. Extremely powerful. So again, the very first thing about priority, make sure that your priority paragraph in your specification is spot on. That was pause for emphasis. Second thing is, I want you to make sure that the priority section is absolutely 100% correct in the ADS. So in the disclosure statement where you actually go ahead and fill in the inventor's information, and in fact I think in segment 3-32 I have a video that you will go through that will show you how to fill in the ADS. But the ADS document is really the controlling document that governs priority. So if you go ahead and submit your specification and the priority is spot on, it at least gives you a fallback argument to say, you know what, we disclosed it. But the ADS ultimately is what governs. Now, yes, the law is a little bit changing in that regard, but for purposes of our clinic, that is what governs. So the ADS needs to be absolute spot on. So when you go in, there is a national priority section, and that is where you would fill in the information to show the present application is a continuation of a provisional, or is the conversion of a provisional, and is the continuation of a non-provisional. So you can have all the selections there as to what exactly the present application is, but you need to make sure that you get that ADS right. Because that, at the end of the day, is what is used as the basis for the filing receipt that the U.S. Patent Office sends after they receive your application. So you send them the application, they get all the documents, they process the ADS, that information then gets outputted, hopefully correctly, onto what's called a filing receipt. And that is where the Patent Office sends back this document that says, okay, we've received your application, here is the priority chain, please verify it. What they're using for that is the ADS. So you want to make sure that the ADS is 100% correct, and as a backup, you want to make sure that your specification is 100% correct as well, that they in fact are exact mirror images of each other. So if you get the ADS right and you get the specification right, then you should have no issues with priority.